Welcome to Gold Derby. I'm senior editor Denton Davidson here with Eva Longoria, director of Flamin Hot, the story of Richard Montañez and his rise from janitor to executive at Frito-Lay. Eva, this was your feature film directorial debut. Why this story to make that leap? And what was that experience like for you?
Oh my God. Well, it was an amazing experience. That's a whole hour conversation on its own. But yeah, I've been directing TV for 10 years and I love TV. I love the medium of television. I like the speed of television. I also like staying with characters for a long period of time. So I wasn't like, I must do a feature now. I've just had pretty much touched every rung of the ladder in TV. I did half hour, 1 hour comedy, drama, single cam, multicam, small pilots, big pilots. I mean, I love TV. And my agent sent me this script and she's like, look, I don't think you're gonna get this. Not because she didn't believe in me, because she was like, it's Searchlight and there's a lot of directors up for it. Like there's some really, experienced, directors, because it was an amazing story.
Yeah.
And I read it and I was like, no, this one's mine. And I worked really hard on a presentation, a huge deck. It was like a 2 hour presentation of everything that I wanted the movie to be. And so then I did get the job,
Which
and I
is
remember
very
the
Richard like. I mean, that's sort of what happens in the movie.
I know. We say this all the time because even like when it comes out, we're scrappy when it came out, to get the success it got and to make sure people saw it. It was like we had definitely a Richard Montañez approach of like do it yourself. But thematically, it was a project that I looked at and I was like, oh, this is my superpower. Like I knew I could knock this one out of the park because I've read a lot of scripts and I'm like, ooh, I do not add any value to that. Like that's just not my wheelhouse sometimes. And not that you can't expand as a director, but like for me, this one came in and it was a community I knew, it was a culture I knew. I am Richard Montañez. Like I've been underestimated, I've been told no. And so there was so much about it that I was like, nope, this is it. This I could use all my superpowers. My shortcut with actors, since it was such a big character piece at being a biopic, I knew I was gonna, be an advantage for, the person who would play Richard Montañez, because we could figure it out together and really dig in together. And I mean, Jesse Garcia gives an amazing performance.
Yeah, talk about finding him and or deciding him. Why was he the perfect person to play Richard? And what does being an actor give you as a director?
Um, I actually think directing helps me be a better actor.
Okay.
People think I'm a actor turned director, producer. I've always been a producer. When I moved to Hollywood, I was a PA, I was an AD. Produced live events. I worked at production companies. Like I loved producing and putting stuff together. I used to have to watch tapes. I produced a comedy night at the Improv. I had to watch all these VHS tapes of comedians, and we put together sketches, and then we had a percentage of the door and it wasn't enough to pay the comment. I mean, it was producing 101 back, 25 years ago. And then I fell into acting and I was like, okay, but I've always been, really hyper aware of how projects can be made and put together. And so I really think it made me a good actor because I kind of know how the sausage is made. But I had been a fan of Jesse Garcia's for 15 years. I remember him in Quinceañera, which won Sundance, and he got all of these accolades back then. And so when we started casting, he was top on the list. And I was like, wow, I haven't seen him in a minute. And it was a rigorous process because it's a biopic. So you have to be somewhat true to, who you're looking for, which was a Mexican American. I knew I wanted a Mexican American actor specifically within the Latino spectrum. And along with that, the first round we did factory sides, like they had to read all these scenes from the factory, because it was about the Flaming Hot, making of the Flaming Hot Cheeto. And once we got a group of actors that could do that, the callback was then scenes from the gangbanging years and the younger scenes. And that was like a different person as well. It was like tough, it was gangster, it was dangerous, it was a whole different Richard. And then once actors got past that round, the last callback was Judy scenes. Could they be vulnerable and shed everything we just auditioned with and take a whole left turn and be very vulnerable and open with his wife? And that's when Jesse just shined. He could just do all the gears. And so this was a big undertaking for the actor, who was going to play 3 different decades, 3 different genres. I mean, it was a comedy, a drama, it was a biopic. It was, I mean, it was it was a lot of work. It wasn't until after we wrapped that I realized Jesse was about to have a breakdown because it was so hard. I was like, oh my God, he's like, I'm going to die. I'd never noticed it because he just showed up every day ready to go. But yeah, so I was a big fan of his before.
The type of film it is, I mean, especially in his younger years, he had some
Yeah.
rough times. I mean, he was involved with drugs. He
Yeah.
had problems with the law. And then Judy got pregnant and she was the one that sort of was like, okay, get it together. Like we're about to have a family.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
But the film in general is a comedy. I laughed a lot throughout it. So what was the decision for tone? I mean, you could have a very serious drama, but this is a comedy.
It really is, but I'm a comedian at heart. Like that is my superpower. I can do comedies. Like that's most of my TV experience is comedy. I knew the minute I heard the story and read about the story, I did not want to make a movie about the Flaming Hot Cheeto. And I knew I wanted to make a movie about this man. Like his life is pretty amazing. And I was like, you can't make an earnest movie about the Flaming Hot Cheeto. And I didn't want it so saccharine, because it wasn't a happily ever after, tied up in a nice bow kind of ending. Even though it's ends really well because he worked for the company for 40 years and he just retired. He was amazing. But I went down a rabbit hole of real Richard because he's a speaker, a motivational speaker now, and he does a lot of that speaking, TED Talks and things like that. And he's funny. He is so funny. And I said, the minute I got the job, I said, we're putting this in his POV. This is his voice, his literal voice. Like I must have watched 50 speeches he had done. And I took so many excerpts of little things he said. PhD, I got a PhD. I'm poor, hungry, and determined. That was from one of his speeches, when he's like, don't be talking smack about Mexicans being gangsters. I didn't make this up. I lived it. Like that was from a speech of his. So a lot of the dialogue is his literal words. And he's really funny. He's so funny in life. But if you meet him, you're like, oof, there's still that gangster under there. Like he will pop you. So it was kind of easy in that sense of like what I had in my head. It was hard to communicate that to the studio of what the tone of the movie was, because I've never seen this tone in a film. So there was no comp for it. I was like, it's obviously Scorsese-esque in like the voiceover, but not as lyrical and not as slow. And I wanted it a little journalistic like Adam McKay, but not so fast and frantic, like when he, the Vice and The Big Short, like all of those, like, all right, in 2008, there was a housing crisis and the loans and the this and the short. Okay, got it. Great. We're moving on. Like, you're like, so I was like, I want it somewhere in between those two, because those two, McKay and Scorsese do first persons so well. I mean, McKay goes the extra mile and breaks the fourth wall, and then like I said, Scorsese is so lyrical and romantic about, if it's The Irishman, if it's, anything he's done, it's just so stunning, right? As far as voiceover. But I didn't want to wear out our welcome with a voiceover either. And I never wanted to say what we were seeing. And I think that's sometimes a faux pas when people use voiceover as kind of a crutch to explain things. And it wasn't. I wanted him to almost his voiceover to betray what we were seeing, especially with the themes of racism, classism, microaggressions, where you see him smiling through it, but in the inside, he's dying. He was like, this is this is not cool, man. And so I actually wanted that tonally to be different. And I do think the movie has a very unique tone because of that. It's like, oh wow, like you said, it's like wow, because the minute you're crying, I hit you with a joke, you know. And the minute you're about to tear up, I hit you with a comedic situation or moment. And so I think it's a great roller coaster ride for everybody who sees it.
So was it Richard or the screenwriters, Lindy Yvette Chavez and Louis Kalick, or whose idea was it for the Mexican gangster interpretation of the CEO boardroom?
It was mine.
That was interesting.
It was mine, and I explained it to Linda, and she wrote it beautifully. But I've always been a fan of Drunk History.
Okay.
Do you watch that show?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love it. Like, you know, Billy the Kid and, you know, Cleopatra, like when they reenact history, drunk comedians recounting history. It's just so funny. But it did actually, it's so funny because like, where did it come from? It came from Richard. Everything came from Richard because as I sat with Richard, once I got the job and I sat with Richard time and time again to really, because we rewrote the whole shebang of the script. And he would say, you know, and he said another line in the movie is like, I'm the smartest uneducated bucko you'll ever meet. Because he's not educated, but man, is he smart. And he goes, man, I didn't even know what a boardroom was. He goes, I thought it was like a room full of boards. I don't know. He didn't know what headquarters meant. Well, at headquarters, and he was like, is that where they keep a bunch of quarters? Like, he really like, and every time he explained something to me, I would just laugh so hard, not because I was laughing at him. I was like, yeah, that's a dumb name. I don't know where boardroom, you know, whatever, you know, yeah, I guess that does make sense. You would think of it like that if you've never experienced a boardroom. And then the first fantasy sequence in the film before the gangster stuff is when he beats up the guy in his head. And he told me that story. He's like, man, he goes, some people were so mean to me. And he goes, I just had to bite my tongue and go, you know, I could kill you right now with my hands. Like I have beaten up so I've done so much in my past that I could snap you in half, but I choose not to, you know. So he's like, I had to mind my gangster. And so that's why that fantasy sequence where he beats the shit out of a coworker, and then he's like, I'm just kidding. It was my first week on the job. I couldn't really do what I wanted to do to this guy. That's where it kind of came out. And I was like, God, you know, Richard has such a viewpoint and imagination. He had such an imagination back then of what these things were. And so that was part of it, right? So I was like, okay, I think we can have so much leeway with, you know, so much liberty if we have these fantasy sequences. We could say and do whatever we want because it's out of his head. But also because the movies is only in his point of view, I kept bumping on going to Frito-Lay headquarters and showing scenes with Enrico when Richard wasn't there. And that's part of his legendary status is like, he had never even met Roger Enrico when he picked up the phone to call him. He didn't know, you know, they were in trouble that much. He didn't know there was another spice in the Midwest beat. Like he really didn't know this. Why would the janitor have access to what was happening at headquarters in Plano, Texas? So I said, anytime we are there, it has to be what he thought was happening, what he imagined was happening. And that's what gave us that idea that Linda just leaned into. And she was like, oh, so she watched Drunk History. And then she was like, oh, okay, so it could be anything. I said, anything. It could be anything. And she came up with Cholo Translator, Linda, you know.
What about the factory? Because we see these chips being made. How did you do that? Explain to me, like, what's going on?
Oh my God, I'm so happy, Denton, that you said that because, man, we had to build that factory from zero. That was an empty room.
I was wondering if it was a set design. Were you in a factory?
Set design.
What?
Complete build from zero, ground up. We built the factory because we went to a Frito-Lay factory early on, and the story happens in the 1970s and 80s. Today, everything is highly mechanized. So there's not a lot of people that actually work on the floor anymore. It's all machines. Even like in the 70s and 80s, people would, pick up the bags and put it in a box, and then the next person would fold the box closed, and then the next person would put a sticker on the box. Like all of that is a machine now. Like they don't need somebody to pick up the bags and put it in the box and put the sticker. A machine closes the box, you know. So we actually couldn't use a real Frito-Lay factory. Also, I think they operate 24/7. Even if I wanted to use a Frito-Lay factory, it wasn't available. They're like, we will never shut down part of the factory so you could shoot your little movie. So we, from the start, and my two production designers were amazing, Brandon Mendez and Cabot McMullen. And he said, you know, we have to build this. And they drew me some sketches. We watched multiple YouTube videos of how chips are made. And there's a tumbler and there's an extruder. And so we were like, okay, so if we do this, because I really want, it had to feel like a real factory, and half the movie, it takes place in the factory. So we were like, okay, how do we do this? And, you know, tumbler, extruder, fryer, I mean, everything. And so we had conveyor belts everywhere, and special effects really knocked it out of the park. And then Frito-Lay sent us all product, because on every conveyor belt had to be different things. It had to be Doritos over here, Cheetos over there, chips over here, Sun chips over here, because they were being invented at the time. And we were so accurate that when Richard came, the real Richard, to see that he's like, I think you guys could actually make potato chips here, because we did it so well. And then I was worried about, you know, sound design. I was like, God, is this going to be so loud? And we, you know, designed for that, to make sure that these machines weren't going to be like clack, 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 over dialogue. So it was amazing. It was an amazing build. I'm so proud of our production design team.
And you won an audience prize at South by Southwest. Palm Springs recognized you as one of the directors to watch. What does recognition like that mean for you? A director, I'm going to be honest, I do a lot of these interviews. I don't see anyone in my upcoming schedule that's a Latina director. So What does that mean for you specifically?
Yeah, I mean, let me tell you, what you just said that I did not miss that idea that, you know, Latina directors we don't get many bites at the apple. And so I carried that with me every day of like, I can't get this wrong, because if I get it wrong, they're gonna be like, we hired a Latina that one time and yeah, she didn't do well, so we're not going to do it again for 10 more years. The last studio film that was directed by a Latina was 22 years ago. And I was like, we can't get a film every 22 years. Like, that's not cool. We have stories to tell. And so, you know, anytime these, you know, especially this season right now, which is award season, I am so proud of everybody's work on the film. I want our production designers to get recognized. I want my DP to get his flowers. You know, I want our costume designer, Elaine Montalvo, who killed it. You know, Teresa, our department head of hair, she must have did 50 wigs for the movie. I mean, it was like she designed 3 different decades with 3 different wigs for all the characters. I mean, it was hard. And she came in pretty, you know, as we started shooting, Teresa, she did Meet the Ricardos with Aaron Sorkin. She's doing something. She's amazing. She's obviously acclaimed. I had our sound design, Philip, he won the Oscar for Sound of Metal. That was my sound engineer. And he was like, we had long conversations about, you know, what level is the factory noise? Do you want it taka, 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 like, or is it like a hum, or is it like a chicka-ching, chicka-ching, chicka-ching? Is it like a train? Is it like the sound design of the movie? Our sound team was amazing. I was like, gosh, yes, good questions. We're like, hey, we should figure this out. So that's what I like about these recognitions and the audience award, because it just means everybody was fully in to the film, you know, and you didn't see the wig, you didn't see the conveyor belt, you just saw the film in its entirety and enjoyed it and had an experience with it. And so that's what all of these recognitions, you know, mean to me. Is I think they're important because it just brings attention to the team we assembled.
And I think people just enjoy it because it's an inspirational story. No matter what race you are, it's inspirational. I mean, this is one man's rags to riches story. And I mean, everyone can take pieces away from it, it's also a love story. I mean, they're still
Yes. Yeah.
almost 50 years later. So
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing. When I first sat down with Linda to write the story, Linda and I sat down with Richard maybe 3 times by this point, and we had both looked at each other. Oh, we were driving back from Rancho Cucamonga because they live an hour outside of LA, and we were in the car, and when I was driving, and I go, this is a love story. She goes, I was just going to tell you the same thing. This isn't like, I mean, it is the underdog story, American dream, success 101. It's all those thematically. Like, I just think that's low hanging fruit in the genre of what it is. Like, yeah, yes, it's that. Of course, it's that. Like perseverance and, will he overcome his challenges? Yes. But at the heart of the movie is a love story and how a woman's love can inspire you to do great things. And also thematically, I really wanted to explore what happens when opportunity isn't distributed equally. Talent is, anybody could be talented, but not every person gets that opportunity. And Richard did not get that opportunity his whole life. And he continued to ask, but why not? Why not me? Why can't great things come from somebody like me? And finally he found somebody who said, I don't know, why not? Tell me your story. And that was Roger and Rico.
Well, Eva, it was such a pleasure to talk to you about this film. Congratulations on it. It's so good. And thanks for chatting with Gold Derby today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I love when people enjoy the film and it lands as we intended it to.